While 40 years ago a strength and conditioning coach was unheard of, it is now obviously the norm. However, in the last decade, the new growing coach specialists are coaches who specialize in leadership and culture. With a team's culture and the leadership of the athletes being essential in a team reaching its potential, I think it's only natural that moving forward, more and more teams are going to be bringing in coaches who specialize in this area. Teams are not just looking for every edge they can on performance, but people in sports are valuing the experience of its members, not just the outcomes of the team. Today's guest, Jack Easterby, is arguably one of the most experienced character, culture, and leadership coaches in the world. In less than 20 years, he went from an intern at the Jacksonville Jaguars to the character coach at the University of South Carolina to the Kansas City Chiefs to winning 3 Super Bowls as the character and culture coach at the New England Patriots to the front office of the Houston Texans, serving primarily as the vice president of team development, but even stepping in as interim GM at one stage. Now, Jack and I have a special connection, and that as we went to high schools only a few miles apart in Columbia, South Carolina, and in 2005 and 2006, when I was a walk-on for the University of South Carolina Gamecock basketball team, Jack was our leadership coach and chaplain. I'm not even sure at the time I knew what his title was. I just think our head coach, Dave Odom, just saw an exceptional human being with a heart for people, a skill for building relationships, and just wanted him around the team, wanted him around us. Now, we're going to break our conversation with Jack into 2 parts. In this episode, we're going to be discussing some of his core principles and his time at New England, as well as the many insights and learnings that he can share with us from the experience of being around arguably the greatest dynasty in sports and the greatest football coach of all time. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is JP Nerman, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Nate Sanderson. The mission of this podcast is to help all of us, listeners and ourselves included, to build better team cultures, become better leaders, and become better people. I'm also the founder of TOC, a sports consulting business that provides practical resources and education, as well as one-on-one coaching for coaches. I know from personal experience, coaches need coaches. We need support along the journey. If you want to learn more about us, check us out at tocculture.com. Also, there, if you subscribe to our weekly newsletter, you will get the notes to this and every episode. Lastly, Jack talks about the importance in this episode of systems in organizations. And I loved hearing this as this year, my most recent book, The Culture System, was released. You can learn more about the book at myculturesystem.com, or you can just go ahead and purchase at Amazon. All right, let's get right into the first half of our conversation with Jack.
Well, Jack, we're excited to have you on the podcast here this week. And quite frankly, we're going to cut right to the chase here with the most important question, at least that I could come up with here as JP and I were talking. So in 2018, before the Super Bowl that the New England Patriots were playing in, USA Today wrote an article, and they referred to you as the Patriots' secret weapon. And so, Jack, for 4 years, I'm sitting here wondering, how would he articulate the secret? What is the secret weapon, Jack, that had made you so successful working with some of the Patriots? Let's release it to the world right here.
Well, I think those clickbait titles probably are have less content after you get beneath the header there. But no, I really enjoyed my time in New England. I think that one of the greatest things about Bill and his leadership there in relationship to the staff and the different roles of the staff is that, obviously you're given what you earn from a responsibility standpoint. And so Bill was very strategic in the fact that, he gave each staff member things that he felt helped the team. And as you produce in your role, you get more things. And so obviously I joined the Patriots in 2013, and they had been successful before I got there and were already, obviously one of the best dynasties in American sports. But I was blessed to really, impact the connection of the building. Was really my challenge from Bill, was to make sure that the building was connected, that the building had healthy relationships, and that the building was planning daily, weekly, monthly for those relationships to be functional in a high pressure environment. And so I don't know if there was any secret sauce or anything that we did that was, really different than other people do. But I know that our intentionality to make sure that the building functioned using people's gifts, giving them opportunities to connect with each other, and then also to giving them roles and or potential increased impact according to what they had earned, I think was very strategic and intentional. And so, loved every minute of my time with the Patriots. I felt like I was learning daily as much as I was ever able to help anybody else, just because of the amount of games. I mean, I was telling somebody the other day, when you play that amount of postseason games, right, you almost play a whole additional season. I think there's a stat out there somewhere about Tom playing several additional seasons because of how many postseason games he's played. And from 13 to 19, obviously going to 4 Super Bowls, winning 3, and then participating in all those postseason games, I think gave us a lot of reps. And so you mentioned that article there that was at the end of my time there. So when you have that many reps and your relationship, driven, and your premise of being in the building is to build relationships and build strategy that helps the team. I think obviously, hopefully over time that multiplies to be able to leave people better than you found them and make a difference.
Jack, I want to kind of take a step back and reflect on your time at South Carolina, where our relationship was first formed, and I was always amazed. First off, just about your energy, and you're one of these people that I talk to I share with others, is that super connected, super authentic. Just when you're talking to Jack, he's really truly listening. And I was just curious if you could kind of share your journey into this profession, or this, not even profession, it's bigger than that, right? This ability to be a connector, a relationship builder. How do you do that so well, and how did you kind of end up into these type of roles?
Well, it's always good, JP, to talk to a Gamecock, right? I think I love our connection, and my time at South Carolina, similar to what I just shared about New England, was very special, and you were a huge part of that. I think, when I graduated from college, one of my goals, obviously, was to work in athletics. And I think a lot of people make a mistake that they give one role or one title or potentially one objective that they want to accomplish. And that begins to be the lens in which they look at everything, right? And it can really result in a real myopic or small view of how the gifts of each one of us can be used, and or the impact of each one of us can be used. And so I chose, not to do that. When I graduated college at Newberry, I had a chance to intern in the NFL for the Jaguars. And then as I began to look for my first full-time job, I really wanted to be associated with a sports team in a way that I could learn and be in the lifeblood of the team, but also learn how team structure works, how team leadership works. And the best inroads was actually through academic advising. Obviously, when you're a student athlete in college, you have this massive workload that is your sport, but you also have your academics that you're maintaining as a part of being a student athlete. And so the University of South Carolina offered me the opportunity to be what they called a learning specialist at the time, which is essentially a study hall prompter and or organization of the academic schedules around the athletic schedules. And so I was blessed to, in 2005, to begin a relationship with Dave Odom with the men's basketball team. And Dave was exactly what I had set out to be a part of, or Dave became exactly what I had set out to be a part of, meaning that he really gave access to everything in the program for me to be a part of. And so a part of, as a Christian, as a part of my influence academically, we had weekly Bible studies. And when I first got there, there was another guy leading them, and Fellowship of Christian Athletes had a great program on campus. And so my goal was just, to be a part of the study hall, and then to, care for these people well within the basketball program. And then, over the years, the role began to expand, and I began to run basketball camps for Dave, and I began to do devotions for the team. I began to assist more academically, and then also within the team construction and help and coach out. And so I was really blessed through the opportunity to have a door open there with Coach Odom and the athletic department in South Carolina. But the role, just like most roles, you get what you earn. And so the role started with just academics, and then it began to be more and more as we tried to build a really awesome program there at South Carolina. And so when you were there and several other athletes are early in the tenure, my goal was to really serve. I was young, wasn't too much older than most of you guys. And so I was able to relate and able to build good relationships. And my goal was to connect with you and others with the challenges you have as an athlete to be functional, to pour out every day, but also to have someone pour in. And so, I believe I have an old saying that I've always said a lot of times if your output exceeds your input, then your upkeep becomes your downfall, And so I think we can all relate to that, where we feel the pressures of what's going on and we try to produce daily some sort of action. But if we don't have somebody pouring into us or caring for us, sometimes we can go dry pretty quick. And so that stint that you're referencing early on was really centered on caring for the whole wellness of the student athletes here at South Carolina. And I loved every minute of it.
And what was so impactful about you is you're not just an authentic individual, and you obviously live your faith, and then people know that, but it's very welcome. It's not in a welcoming way. It was always what I felt in the building. It was just, hey, he's there if you want to talk to him. And when guys go through hard times, they'd want to go talk to Jack. It was just, there was that energy about you. Outside the authenticity, you mentioned this word earlier, intentionality. How do you, especially around those times, and as your role evolved and you end up in Kansas City and in England, but really just like, what are some of those intentional ways that you really worked early on to build relationships with athletes and reach out to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you genuinely care about anything, right, love prompts intentionality, right? And so when you genuinely care about something, whether that's your front yard or, whether that's, another person, you're naturally going to begin to be creative at how you can improve that thing, right? So to me, it starts with love, caring for others, and really trying to be straightforward in how you care for others. If that's in a professional setting, right, there's certain things that you have to keep in mind there, or if that's in a personal setting, just with your own family. So to me, it starts and ends really with loving things, entities, people well. And to do that, you have to be intentional. And so, I appreciate you saying that. I'm humbled by your words there. I think for me, it's always been because I care. It then prompts an intentionality to begin to try to increase the value of others, the encouragement of others, the mentality of others, the standing of others. Because again, if you can lead people better than you found them, whether that's in a professional setting where you've grown someone from one position to another, or you can leave a person better than you found them as they navigate life's challenges, then you've done your job as a person, as a leader, and specifically in some of these cases, different places as a stewarder of their lives. And so I think the intentionality is directly attached to the love, and I think that as people feel that intentionality, and then they feel love, and then the gateway begins to open wide at how great they can be and reach their potential.
A lot of our listeners are college coaches or high school coaches, and so you've had experience, with that kind of demographic or age group. I know it's changed a good bit in the last, since you were last at South Carolina, but still, is there maybe, I don't know if the word tip is the right word, but just some things that you would recommend coaches that obviously they operating from a place of loving their athletes, which I love how you talk about that has to be the foundation, because if we just come in with strategies to build relationships, but there's not love, if we don't see them as a person, then we're really just using those strategies to get something from them. Right. So I love that. But, what recommendations would you have for some of our college coaches and high school coaches as far as building those relationships with that athletes in that demographic?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be hard to give you just one thing. I think what I would say that I've learned and maybe not always done well, but I think is at the pinnacle of the mentality that we need to have is, I think we naturally look at things in life, or as a leader, as a coach, you naturally look at the next step or the next iteration that you desire, right? So if you're coaching a team, you just want that next step. We could just do this, or if you have a player you're working with, you say, well, if I could just get this player to do this. I think it's very healthy to not exist in that paradigm all the time, right? I think you have to take a step out of that next iteration type of mindset, and then widen the lens at looking at the big picture of where that person or that program or potentially that initiative that you're trying to steward or launch is going to be in 5, 6, 10 years. What are the attributes that are going to result in the best behavior modifications, or what are the best principles that you can engage in? So I would just say my like chief thought would be, don't really get granular in behavior change or potentially even just strategy change until you've taken a really wide lens and looking at as much information as possible, because you're going to learn things in that wide lens that are going to decrease your intensity on the wrong things and increase your intensity on the right things. And so I would just say the wide lens is so important, and visit that lens as much as you possibly can. We all have day-to-day activities that we have to engage in, but when you're building a program or a business or a strategy, being able to know that day to day it's going to deviate, right? It's going to change. There's going to be news headlines. There's going to be people with life challenges. So you can't get caught in, well, I just need this to go this way, because it's going to derail everyone in their confidence in you as a leader. You really have to take a wide lens and look at behaviors, look at, how you want people to experience your program, experience how you want them to be different when they leave your program, and really cast a wide vision, then come back to the day-to-day things that you want to change, or let's say the momentary problems, or the problems of the moment that you're trying to navigate. I think that's probably the greatest wisdom I could give someone that's trying to improve their program today, is don't get stuck on that moment, because that problem you think today is just Everest, right? It's not going to be Everest forever. And if you let it become the guiding light for how you deal other things, then you're going to begin to see things irrationally and sometimes emotionally.
I think, Jack, part of that wider lens too is not only where we're trying to take them, but how they're coming into their experience in the building or with our team, or whether it's that specific day or the household that they're coming out of. I think you're right on in terms of the more information that we can absorb into our perspective, the more likely we are, as you said, to be intense about the right things when it comes to supporting the human that we're trying to get to box out better or show up on time for practice or whatever it might be. And this kind of transitions me a little bit too into your experience in the NFL. You went from South Carolina to Kansas City and then on to New England, and we're really one of the first guys in the league that was sort of brought in. I don't know if it's really a non-football purpose, but it's not a traditional one for sure. And so I wonder if you could speak to, whether it's in Kansas City or in New England, what is it that they saw that they were missing that sort of created an opportunity for somebody like you to be able to step into sort of exploring a new role in the NFL?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, you'd have to ask them what they saw. I think the need is when you're in transition, right, as an athlete or or as a as a coach or any role in sports or business, your emotional intelligence is fractured, right? So when you're used to one environment, JP's situation, like used to the University of South Carolina and how he operates there, anything from where he goes to eat to his medical providers and all the things that go on into his scene, let's call it, at the University of South Carolina. When you reallocate your life into a different environment, whether you're moving or whether in this case you're making a pro team, your emotional intelligence is fractured. And when it's fractured, there needs to be a reinsertion of values, a reinsertion of truths that begin to allow you to calibrate in that new environment. And I would say that was probably the pinnacle of what my goal was when I was at South Carolina and then entering into the NFL was, to be able to make sure that you are inserting truth when people are onboarded, when they're brought into a different environment, giving them the skills and or preparing them for what they're going to face, and hopefully helping them with what they need to be able to navigate day to day. Because really, it's a lot different. It's just not the same. It's really actually a different job, right? When I've laughed about this analogy. I think this is an interesting analogy, right? But there's very few punters, right, who are also holders in college. And so just to give you an example, like when you sign up, when you're a punter, you're the best punter in college football. And then you go and maybe one of your most important jobs is holding on a game-winning field goal. That's a job description shift, right? And so now you're talking about new city, you're talking about new job description, you're talking about new people, you're talking about new environment, and you're talking about different pressures that impact you. And for me, I've always really loved the opportunity to help people through that, through system building or through personal relationships. And I think that's probably what those entry days were early on into the NFL, were helping people when they go through those transitions to be able to impact them and hopefully help them do those things well.
Two follow-ups to that. One is just, you mentioned that word emotional intelligence. And I remember when we first, started really connecting again, around your time in New England, you really prompted me to really dive into more understanding around emotional intelligence, how it's to be developed. I was hoping you could kind of just speak to, the importance of that when it comes to relationship building, but also within team culture and performance, and why it was so critical at New England.
Yeah, well, I mean, I couldn't speak to one specific culture. I'd say generally speaking, though, your intellectual intelligence and your emotional intelligence, they speak to each other. The old head speaking to the heart and the heart speaking to the head, right? And so I think that over the last 10 years, and quite frankly, it really ties in with technology, right? And how we've seen technology begin to impact our intellectual intelligence at a fast rate and our emotional intelligence at a fast rate. I think that people have had a heightened sense of both of those and how those impact their environments if you're trying to, build a team or build a business. And so I think what, you and I have talked about a lot is, I think, being able to be aware of both of those, to also be aware of someone's standing as far as their emotional standing and how they're coming into the room and or how they'll handle situations, or potentially committing to helping them grow how they're going to handle things, I think is what separates good programs, good businesses from bad businesses, and ones that whether it's burnout or frustration or friction within the building, ones that have that, they struggle because they're not able to sustain the volume and the habits and the reps that you need to be good at anything, right? And so, yeah, I've always said, I think your intellectual intelligence, I think your emotional intelligence, I think your curiosity, quotient, and then also now, because we have all these different generations that essentially are overlapping from the greatest generation kind of riding out, and now baby boomers and those who've dealt with this iPhone generation, whether it's, you want to call it millennials or IY, or there's some different vernacular to tie to it. But to me, emotional intelligence has been the separator. We've always had smart people in the world, specifically in our country and within our teams and our workforce. Now we've got a massive amount of intelligence, but that separator seems to be, how your intelligence can inform your emotions, so that you apply the right amount of emotion in each setting, right, within the expected needed emotion. So I think that it's a separator for sure.
You also mentioned system building as part of, started to become your role there, or you were part of that at New England. What's that look like within a professional organization? I'm curious about that, as I think I know what it means, and how it might actually be able to helpful towards for other teams as well out there too.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting about professional sports that I would say, is a little different than college because of the governance and the different levels of compliance is I think, each professional entity, right, whether it was, in the NBA or Major League Baseball or the NFL, they're so different, right? They're so different in relationship to how they structure their business, how they structure the different positions that go on around the building, and/or how they structure their staffing, how they structure their profit strategy. And so I think that when you're system building, a lot of your system building is using previous informed experiences from that entity to help that entity evolve going forward. And I think that system building, in my opinion, along with emotional intelligence and along with the ability not to repeat errors and to evolve, quickly with the speed of how modern business works, I do think those are separators because ideally your system building allows you to see information, receive information, and then declare information more applicably, more expediently and efficiently. And so I think that the correlation, what you mentioned between the human interaction, right, is just a demand as a leader. You have to, if you want to be a leader, you have to care for people, you have to invest in people, and you have to be genuine. When it becomes a lot of people, which is how professional sports work and college sports work, and even high school athletic departments, it's a lot of people. You can't transactionally, interact with every single person around the building every day. And so you have to build systems that allow good decisions to be made, which obviously will allow the confidence of the building to stay high and problems to be solved. And so I've always loved system building because I think there's no greater way a lot of times to love somebody than to put them in a good program, a good system that's going to help them get the best out of them from a work product or from an athletic product. And so it's been fascinating to learn all these different systems. Going back to South Carolina, I think Eric Hyman, the athletic director when I was there, was a big system builder guy, and I'll never forget. When he went into the seat licensing and kind of restructured the entire seat ticketing operation. And, it was kind of, at the time there was bedlam within the donors because everybody was going, man, what are we doing? What are we doing? But what he did was he built a system to essentially, double, triple, quadruple the revenue opportunities for, a smaller state. South Carolina's a smaller state within the landscape of the SEC. And what he did was open the gate for a phenomenal facilities reconstruction that now Coach Tanner's taken over, and they've evolved into some of the better facilities in the league. So I think I just think those types of systems that quench the needs of people, right, while also inspiring people, I think are really fun. But as I mentioned, every single system is different, and every single entity needs different systems. And so you really have to have that cognitive flexibility to not just jam down the throat of an entity and say we have to do this, but really sit back, study, and then make the right decisions for the next group of people.
Jack, I want to circle back for a second, just to your time in New England. And one of the things you said in your opening answer, where you talked about essentially with Bill, everything is earned. And I think that's one of the hardest challenges with supporting athletes. I don't care whether you're talking about my third grade daughter's team or you're talking about a professional team, that as you ascend, right, the competition becomes greater for playing time or for spots or for contracts or draft picks or whatever it might be. And somebody that's used to being the man, in high school, now transitioning to college, or college transitioning to pros, it can be a challenge, to be able to now have to fight for something maybe that was always easy for you or always came natural, whatever it might be. So when you're trying to build and support what I would call kind of a culture of earning, which certainly you have, at the professional level, how do you come alongside a guy, to help them with that transition?
Well, I think probably the best example would be, let's just use the ball, right? If you just use the ball to give an easy analogy that everybody understands, I think when you carry the ball in football, right, you carry the future of the team, right? Because you have the ball. So when you have the ball, you obviously, if you turn it over, right, it changes everything that goes in with scoring potential, that goes in with the probability of winning the game. So giving the ball to someone is a action of trust. It's an action of stewardship that we believe you can take this ball, and obviously go down the field with it. And that's not for everybody, right? Not everybody on the field is going to get a chance to carry the ball. And so I think that responsibility within team construction, it's very important that responsibility, in this case, the ball, carrying the ball, is earned, and it's earned through repetition. I think what we've mixed up in a lot of times in the onboarding of athletes, or potentially anybody, is we've mixed up the affirmation and the encouragement with responsibility, right? And so I think what happens is, if you're going to lead a group of people, or you're going to lead, potentially a team or even a business, you have to have reps on time on task that you've done to be able to earn that responsibility. And yes, when a player comes into a building, we want to affirm him. We want to encourage him. We want to care for her. If that helps them, energizes them, and makes them feel safe. But we don't necessarily want to give them responsibility to take the hopes and dreams of the team with them until they've earned that, right? And so I think there's a delineation there that probably needs to be a slow trickle. And I think that's what, like you mentioned, third grade basketball all the way up to Fortune 500 America is, you want to affirm the new members of the team, welcome them, be very inclusive in all things that we do as leaders. But the responsibility has got to go to those who've repeated the reps over and over and over, and have proved that they can handle those types of things, because then you're threatening the trust and or the productivity of the entire team if we rush people too quickly to the top in relationship to their, let's say, carrying the ball. So I think the affirmation of anybody in your team, hey, listen, Nate, I'm so thankful for you. I appreciate you. I'm glad you're here today. Affirming effort, affirming, a good play, affirming a good, report. If it's a business, I think that affirmation is needed, and we have to participate in positive affirmation. However, responsibility and affirmation are different. And those who have repeated the action that the team needs the most should be the ones that have the most responsibility.
I love that, because I think that speaks to a lot of the things that our coaches struggle with sometimes. Is we want to affirm kids in their, let's say, their attendance in the off season or their investment in their own development. And yet at some point they still have to be able to do the job to get the job, and I think kids have a hard time understanding the difference between affirmation, and responsibility. And I guess I'd follow up with that. This is just another, curiosity I've always had about kind of professional locker rooms. But, when we look at, I was just scrolling on Twitter this morning, and the Vikings produced a video about being all in as they're getting ready for the postseason. And so it's these great clips of them celebrating together, and Justin Jefferson saying, man, we just feel like we're so together in what we're doing. And I just, there's a tension there between, we want to build a locker room where we're all together and we're all pulling in the same direction, and we all are, doing our responsibility. And yet at the same time, I'm competing with that guy to carry the ball, And so how is that balanced in a professional locker room of, there is some internal competition for that responsibility. And yet we all know, obviously in our own experience, that brotherhood does make a difference, being able to still come together.
Yeah, I think, well, let me just say this. I think some of the layers of any team, whether it's a team of your accounting team within a business, or in your point, the wide receiver group who's only got X amount of balls that they can catch each year, I think there's natural competition baked in the cake. And I think the way that you can quickly get over that is to admit it, right? Is to not deal in the closet or behind the curtain on those types of things. Hey, everybody in here wants to win. Everybody in here wants to obviously provide for their families. Everybody in here wants to have an increased responsibility or an increased role, and we admit that. And we're going to do what's best for the team. We're going to do what's best for the employment of everyone in here, or if it's a business, hey, we're going to do what's best for the business to be able to give, the right responsibilities to the right people and or the right roles to the right people as we see it. And so I think you admit that, you go right into it, you don't run from that. And then I think you show past examples of how that potential, let's say, friction has played out, right? And so, hey, listen, I've got, Johnny, who's working in our accounting department, who's young and he wants a bigger role. And, okay, listen, we can't quite have it yet, but if he continues the path he's going, he'll get there. Then you show, as you meet with the accounting department, you show all the different success stories of how, whether it's been great leaders in business or great leaders within that organization or potentially people who've been successful, they started there and they were faithful with what they've been given, and then they expanded it as they went. And so I think where the pressure builds is if you don't admit that, right? You don't address that head on, or you try to make it too equal, and when it's not really equal, right? And I think that's where you build pressure for yourself. And so, that's why I've always tried to say in the early days of when you're addressing a group of people or addressing a team, I think you want to say a lot less. And you just want to admit the obvious, say a lot less, and then allow the work ethic and or the repetitions to declare themselves, so that who's doing what in which role, and you can have a discussion with them that's fair and honest about their next step within the organization or within the team. So I think you ask a great question there, Nate, because there is some pressure within every organization for everybody to have an upwardly mobile type of existence, right? They want to move forward, they want to move up. But if you're going to have, hey, 20-30%, attrition, there's going to be people leave each organization, and there's going to be people thrive in each organization. I think you just admit that, that you celebrate the different parts and paths of that. Then I think you can get to a pretty good place where the group feels cared for and knows that you respect them and that you communicate fairly as the information comes available.
Well, I love that idea of sharing stories of previous guys that have been, in that role, as, think of Julian Edelman following Wes Welker, in a sense, in terms of the job and the earning, right? I mean, Jules had to put in quite a bit of time before he was really trusted, to be able to be on the field as much as he was later in his career. And that kind of brings another question to mind too of, what kind of leadership do professional athletes respond to in the locker room from their peers? Because I think sometimes, one of the things JP and I kind of battle against sometimes is that vocal leadership is confrontational and it's calling guys out and things like that. And obviously we're trying to, work some different strategies in their coaching, for coaches and both for players. But you've been around some great leaders, obviously, in a lot of your experiences. What are the characteristics of some of the best leaders you've seen that have had the biggest impact on the locker room?
Yeah, I think one thing that we're seeing, which is so healthy, and I think you would both admit this right now in the NFL, whether it's, obviously the Lions going in and beating the Packers, and obviously the way Dan leads, or you just mentioned the Vikings and how good of a leader Kevin is. I think we're seeing that it obviously can be very different. And I think that's very helpful because I think whether it was Bill's success or Andy's success or potentially even some of the other coaches before them, I think a lot of times there was a reduplication effort, right, of taking those same core systems and just transferring them into another building and another operation and hoping that you're going to get the same results. And I would say that probably has shelved itself because it hasn't worked. And so I think the key to being able to understand, what you need in that environment and each environment to be a leader starts with yourself and being able to look in your mirror every day and understand how you're gifted, what your strong points are, what your weak points are, because the greatest attribute of a leader is tied to his or her sustainability, right? So whatever you're doing from a leadership mantra, if it's not sustainable, you're not followable. Right. And so I would say, JP's point earlier on authenticity, the reason that to me is at the penultimate level of leadership is because if you're not authentic, then you're not going to be able to stay sustainable under pressure. And when you deviate under pressure, then you're losing, let's say, a vast majority of the people that are following you anyway. So even if you have your principles on the wall, integrity, consistency, whatever they are, if you're not true to yourself and you're not, let's say, over time, producing the same, attributes in the same person in multiple different settings, then you're going to lose traction with the people that are following you. So that authenticity just seems, to be the penultimate, because to me, without that, you don't have a chance, right? And I think a lot of times we take the attributes of somebody like Bill, who's been amazingly successful, or Andy Reid, or even John Wooden, and we take the attributes of those people and we say, hey, look, these are the ones that we should transfer into the new ideal or the new culture. But I really think you got to start with the fact that John Wooden was a teacher. Like, he loved teaching. He loved sitting people down and saying, hey, before we start our season, we got to learn how to tie our shoes. He was a teacher. And so he thought of things in a teaching way, right? Coach Krzyzewski, Coach Popovich, and Coach Belichick grew up within a military context, right? Whether it was West Point or it was Air Force Academy or Bill in Annapolis, they grew up understanding militaristic formatted programming. And so for them, it was to be authentic within program building, to detox ego, to do what's best for the team, and then to be, in some ways, militaristic with system building. There's other people that do it totally different, right? Pete Carroll obviously has his way. And so I think you start with that authenticity, and then I think you tack on, integrity, to be consistent with who you are and the values that are needed. And then I think the third thing that no matter where you go, that you really need to have is just a sincere dedication to what you're doing. If you're not authentic and you're not, in doing what you're doing, you're not, and you don't have integrity, and then you don't have a sincere work ethic, you're not gonna, you can't even get started without that. And so I would say less about the actual attribute of the leader, and I would say that most every leader I've seen have success is authentic, they have integrity, and they have a sincere work ethic that sets the table really for their ability to discover. Because you really, and this is what's funny about this and leadership in general, I think this is something that's really hard to say. It's the position I'm in now. I can say it because of where I am, but you really don't know what it's going to take. You know what I mean? Like, you really don't. Like, you start with a roster of 12, young men, young women as a high school coach, and you think what it's going to take to be able to get to a championship, but you really don't, right? Because you don't know who's going to get sick. You don't know how, an injury is going to derail something. You don't know how we dealt with the pandemic in 2020, 21, right? We don't know the news cycle and how that'll influence everybody's action. In business, right? The profit margins on one side of the business end up being lesser, and you have to shift to a different focus. So to me, it's very important that you start with things like, authenticity, integrity, and work ethic, and then you set the table for everything else you're doing, because you just don't know what it's going to take. You really don't. Like, I'm sure JP would tell you, like, coaching, like, you can start by saying, hey, we're going to score 100 points. And by gosh, we're going to press, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. And then all of a sudden you see, well, we're fouling guys out early. We're turning the ball up. We're speeding our ball handlers up. We're making poor decisions. And you're like, okay, maybe we should play zone. And next thing you know, at the end of the year, you're beating people with low scoring games, playing 2-3 zone every possession of the game. So I think if truthfully as a leader, you don't know how it's going to end up. You start with authenticity, you go to integrity, to be true to what you know is right, to do what's right by both the vision and ethically what's right. And then you just press in on that work ethic and start showing up, start kind of chewing the fat and start really working at it. And then things will begin to declare themselves quicker.
I absolutely love that, because you've kind of a little bit kind of called me out as like the younger JP as a coach. I just took John Wooden's Pyramid of Success and I was handing it out to players. I was preaching about it. I said, this is the way, but I never sat down to think about what was important to me, who I was as a person, who I desired to be as a leader. And I never went through that process. And one of the things that's just so common is we hear the mantra, the values, the phrase, oh, that guy made it to the Final Four last year. Let's tack it up on my wall here, and it's going to be the thing that's going to carry us. And I think what you're talking about there is such a process. I mean, even think about Wooden. I mean, we look at his pyramid of success now. I mean, I believe it started out as a ladder when he was in the classroom, and
Right.
it evolved over time, and he continuously changed words. And it just comes down to that. You said that word dedication, just being so dedicated to your craft and dedicated to leading and discovering yourself. I think that's just really, really powerful. I want to kind of reflect on one leader that you've been around that's, probably one of the most written about football coaches in the game, which is Bill Belichick. And there's a lot, that people talk or speculate. And, but I'm just curious from your perspective, something that maybe a lot of people don't know about him, but you just admire, you do say, hey, that is, something that he does that's, really well, that people don't see. I was just wondering if you could share something like that.
Yeah, I have a massive amount of respect for Bill, not just for what he's done for my family and for me personally, just by training me and teaching me so many things about life and obviously the NFL. Yeah, I think, if you see each day as an X amount of energy, let's just call it a pie for this example, and you have 100% of the energy of that day. I think one of just the premier lessons I learned from Bill was, if you give a lot of energy to the wrong thing, that's obviously going to lead to your own displacement and potentially the displacement of others, right? And so I think he does a great job of giving energy to the things that are going to impact team confidence, that are going to impact the team structure, that are going to impact the team schedule, that are going to impact the team overall strategy. And I think that as a leader, a lot of times in my younger life, I know obviously what's urgent and what's important, those are two different buckets. And so I think he really challenged me, and I watched him live out. You are a chooser of what you give that 100% to, or that pie of energy. You choose it. What you feed will grow, and what you starve will die. And so if you choose to say, hey, listen, I'm just not going to give that a lot of energy, then it's eventually going to not, it's going to go away and or be extricated into or marginalized into a bucket, whether that's a bad attitude, a person with a bad attitude, or it's potentially an initiative that doesn't seem to be working, or maybe it's a situation where you don't see a real conclusion coming, and you're just spinning your wheels, and you just kind of step back and say, let's just stop making this the number one objective every day. I think there's that would be something. I mean, he taught me so much. We could fill 8 podcasts with the lessons and the notes that I had from walking a road and learning from him. But I would just say, what you feed will grow, and so being able to use your energy wisely every day for the betterment of the team, for the betterment of yourself, and the betterment of others, I think is important, because you only have so much of it, and if you spend it, recklessly, then the dividends of that, will keep you busy, for a long time. So you don't want to spend your energy and your effort and your talents recklessly, because if you do, you're stuck managing that misspending more than you're stuck actually leading what you're leading.
Well, Jack, I want to get one more here out of you from your time in New England, and then we'll transition to your Houston chapter here. But in the article, the USA Today article, and I've seen this in some other places, where there have been players that have said, when I was struggling in life, I could always go talk to Jack. I could always go into Jack's office. And I wonder, you mentioned earlier, you used the term psychological safety, or you mentioned safety there as one of the things you're trying to build, into the culture of the building. Why would a guy come in, to sort of bare his soul a little bit to Jack Easterby from the New England Patriots? In other words, what's the groundwork that you've done in order to get them through the threshold of that doorway so that you can really be there to support them when they're going through something that may be challenging on or off the football field?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, again, you'd have to talk to the person who chose to do that case by case. But I would say from our earlier discussion, I think the intentionality to really care for people and to make sure they know you care through your actions, I think is what opens that gate. I think that we are all as humans made in a way that we want to be loved. We want to be cared for, whether that's by an authority figure or whether that's by a spouse or whether that's by, potentially just a teammate. We want to be cared for as people. And so I think as a leader, I think what we're seeing in what we went through really in 2020 to now is there's an audit that's going on across the entire sports world right now about leaders that really care for people and leaders that don't. And what's happening is, whether it's this most recent situation we've seen, in college basketball world, where if someone is acting in a way that potentially is threatening to that genuine care for others, it's gonna select them off the island of leadership. And so I think going back to New England and your question, I think my goal has always been to care for others. Whether that's my family or that's people that I'm working with. I think that's God's call on our lives. I think to genuinely care for others in a way that hopefully leaves them better than you found them. I think that's the premise in which I believe we're called to live. And then how that looks within each job I've had has been different, but I think the goal remains the same. Is when people know you care, you can have more authentic conversation with them, and deeper conversation with them about subjects that really matter. When they're not really sure, obviously there's going to be a threshold there where there's going to be a stop or a governor, if you will, at what the conversation can go to. And again, confidentiality is a big thing. If you have the ability to consistently keep confidential information confidential, I think that helps, with trust. But I would say the premier strategy there, or the premier challenge that I've always tried to have of myself, has been to genuinely care, just genuinely care for others. And listen, there's some times where that vulnerability, can hurt you too. I've had that happen in my life where I've really tried to care for somebody and tried to help someone, and potentially, it's gone wrong, whether they've said something or done something that didn't work out exactly right. So I think you have to be okay with that vulnerability. But your sincerity is going to open more doors than it's going to close over the wide window, because that's what God calls us to do. And I believe that.
All right, we're going to take a break in our conversation with Jack. So much to process from that. Remember, if you want the notes to this and every episode of the podcast, subscribe to our newsletter. The link is in the details of this episode and also at tocculture.com. There you can subscribe. If you go to tocculture.com, you can also learn more about our online courses and one-on-one coaching program for coaches. Also, don't forget to check out The Culture System, a proven process for creating an extraordinary team culture. Lastly, if you are new to this podcast, be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and check us out if you want a better team culture and to become a better leader.